So I was a huge fan of Sirens. It's a lot of fun, and of course it looks gorgeous, not only from the production design perspective, but also from the cinematography. One of the things as I was watching it originally, I was very struck by the differences between the look and the feel, obviously, of Buffalo, for example, and then once you get to this unnamed island, this hybrid of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. It has a very Tony look. It has a very wealthy look to it. How do you reference that through cinematography? What kind of choices did you make to make that distinction?
Well, I think there's two. I mean, there's two purposes, and also the change of look too. One is to represent, like, to know the two places are distinctly different, both in the physical place, but also there are a big difference in the emotional space that they're supposed to represent, or supposed to be like what emotions you're supposed to. They're supposed to evoke, and like why Simone feels at home or wants to be in this place, for example, why she wants to escape Buffalo. So the idea was to contrast them quite drastically, and kind of in the more wintry, gloomy Northeast, in a Buffalo sort of sense, was to be colder, tried to shoot more in the shade, things like that, and make it look more. Not more an expression of like where Devon's at. Like Devon kind of bringing that with her, within her wardrobe and the way she looks, dark colors, she's pale, and make that sort of the feeling of Buffalo. And to accomplish that, from a lighting standpoint, pretty much natural lighting, just trying to not have any bright suns, no bright colors with the design, and also to treat the general color temperature a bit cooler. And also, what was one of the effects we used to. One of the things in cinematography to make the island and to make this mythical island more appealing was to make it's bright, it's colorful, it's all very pastel. I used a little bit of lens diffusion for that as well. And there's a lot trying to always shoot in some sunlight. It's always bright light coming through windows. It always feels very kind of like warm and welcoming, almost to the point of blinding in a way, a bit less sort of mesmerizing in a way, which is part of the intent visually to sort of link it to this idea, this aspirational, like everything is perfect here. Like it's a very, very surface level feeling of that you would think that why Simone, as she said in the script, she says, I don't want to feel sad here, because she doesn't feel sad here. And this is what not sadness represents visually to her. And also with this idea that they're, with the culture and the way the people live there, it's also espousing. And I guess which taps into the whole idea of the theme of Sirens, of the people that are, the siren being the legend, or the legends of the calling and the thing that would give you no power over where you go, and that being seduced essentially. It's visually represent that in a way that is kind of appealing and also kind of daunting in a way. So it was all those techniques together, and I did do some other techniques with the lenses specifically to also alter the visual perception of the way things went out of focus. We used some rear diopters on the lenses we used as area signature primes to help make the way things went out of focus on the edge of the frame feel a bit more distorted, and depending on how someone felt. And I didn't do any of that in Buffalo. Buffalo is very straight and clean. The photography is clean and kind of more naked, if you will. And so you see more of the flaws, see everything kind of sharp and clear, in a real clarity that you don't see in the sort of Port Haven Island is like, it's like you can't see everything. It's all sort of like hazy and fuzzy in a way, that's sort of a metaphor for how it is.
Yeah. And I love, you talked about the pastel color palette. That's certainly, there's not a cloud in the sky there. I don't think there was ever a cloudy day on this island. How did you negotiate that?
Well, we definitely tried to make sure we couldn't have clouds. So there were several days. I mean, that's one of the challenges with a production like this, with a goal like this visually, is to make this place bright and airy. So you want to have good weather. And there's two ways to accomplish that. When we're shooting scenes, I'll schedule the scenes with our brilliant first AD Jude and Nicole, my amazing director, the first two episodes. When we're doing the first two, we're setting the scene for the place. We tried hard to schedule it around, like, where is the sun optimally for these scenes. So you have to work each day around which scene is longest, most important, where you want to have the natural light, do the work for you, hopefully. If you can shoot a scene at the right time of day, or at least in the window of the right time of day, for like your wider shots, that does a lot of work for you. And that doesn't give you any, allowance for weather, of course, because weather is like, it's, and I guess also on Long Island, you have like some morning fog and some rain fog. You have quite a more variable weather than you'd think you would have, and over the course of the summer. So unfortunately, we had a lot of days where it was very cloudy, and we had like no, like it was just an even gray sky with like no sun whatsoever. And so that was a bit difficult to deal with. But one of our techniques was if there's a featureless cloudy day, then we shouldn't see the murky, overcast, boiling kind of clouds that look like it's going to rain. So it's easier to make them go more white and feel like it's more blinding still. And so we tried to do that in the grade, and also as using the photography with grad filters, things like that, to try and make the sky a shapeless, bright object still. So it still felt like it was, sort of a bright day and not a moody. If you went there some days when we were filming, you'd be like, ooh, it's kind of grim. Like our first scene with Julianne Moore, when the first one we shot, when she arrives at the front of the mansion with Millie Alcock, when they had the little thing and they have the little gun exchange. Like, it was raining when we started that scene. So it was just not ideal, but trying to carefully shape the light and try to, create some contrast with some shadows that I can create, and let the sky be more of a hazy white, which can look like, when the sun, often when you like have a bright day, there's a bit of, haze in the air, like the sky loses its blue anyways, you get a backlit sort of sense of bright mist being lit by the sun. So we tried to create that sort of effect, to turn our cloudy days into that, essentially.
One of the things that really struck me as I was watching this series, obviously Kiki and Peter's house, it looks big on the outside, but when you go into the interiors, everything feels cavernous. Like that giant, hallway, it just looks like it never ends. The bedrooms feel large, but they're always like 50% larger than, average bedrooms. The kitchen is huge. How did you sort of negotiate all of that with camera work?
Well, it's an interesting question, because the cavernous is a good feeling, because there's even though it's large, there's kind of nowhere to hide in these sets. Like, there's very little corners, there's no dark recesses. You sort of see everything. There's columns in the center of the thing. There's all the windows have no shades on them. There's almost nothing. There's no way to keep light out, which is the idea that there's always light coming in. There's no sort of escape in some ways. And one of the tricks with that's mansion set was large, amongst the larger ones I've ever done, designed by the amazing John Pano and the incredible set decoration team. I mean, the decor and the colors are quite very like pastel and bright, and also shooting in essentially what is very white walls. It could be, for a lot of people, could be quite challenging. But the idea of it being a big kind of glowing pastel box with the bright sun coming in, and always seeing this the appearance of the beach and the cliff out the windows. You tried to make it so it felt like you could always see everything, but in some ways that means you can't see everything. Like, there's something about knowing you can see everything feels kind of unnerving in a way, because there's something hidden. So part of that is also trying to do two things. One, not look like we're trying to make it cavernous. And one of the things about larger sets is you don't want to use really wide lenses sometimes in certain circumstances, because it tends to look like you were trying to make it large, like you're distorting what is already quite big, which seems a bit out of place. Often if you shoot with a slightly longer lens from farther away, the distance we have from the camera from something else really tells you, like visually, your brain starts to compute that this is a big place. Like if I was shooting somebody from 40 feet away, we know we're somewhere big. If we're always 5 feet away, in certain circumstances, you can sort of tell that we're, in a smaller space, and we're trying to make use of a larger space. So sometimes using the distance from the subject to camera is a big way to help the audience cue in how large the space is. And the other aspect is to try and make sure that there's always an interesting use of foreground. There's an element of like unease to like shooting through objects or through people. Sometimes you're sort of thinking like, well, someone's watching me, sort of thing. There's sort of there's a certain amount of tension in we're not knowing who Peter, the character, is at that point early in the story. Mm-hmm. And we do want to stick at the sense that someone's watching, and he does have a watchtower, as it were. In episode 2, he's looking down at his wife and Millie, peering, looking down through glass. And so to try to use things like that when we're shooting larger spaces, it makes it feel like there's obviously somebody looking at them, because you can't hide. If you're out in this space, there's going to be somebody who has a vantage point from somewhere. And so try and use the camera in those ways to always remind ourselves that there's someone else, a staff member, someone else, maybe Peter, someone else could be watching.
Yeah. There's a couple of things I wanted to follow up on. One thing is in those crowd scenes, I love how when you want to draw attention to Julianne Moore, of course, it's Julianne Moore. How could you not focus on her? How could you not, your eyes constantly on her?
She is magnetic.
Yes, she is. But and perfectly suited for the role of Kiki. But I love how there's depth to the party goers, right? So there's layers of it, but you're constantly focused on her. It's like they're all positioned so that you're kind of framing right there on her, particularly toward in the latter party scene in the Labor Day party sequence.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think that's something also about how you when you stage scenes with characters, it's like you put them in a position of power with how you arrange the characters around them, right? How they appear in the frame. And you can be, even though there can be a lot of people in the shot, you can make it very much still her the focus, right? Like when she's in focus, how you stage people, how far away they are, how they stack up around her to make themselves always available to see her kind of thing. It's almost like creating like she's walking around with her own personal entourage at all times.
Right.
Not just the three fates, as she calls them, like the three friends, but everyone else is like, they're always like, she's always sort of the center of attention. And so you can do that by how you stage people. And like they're in the foreground, they're facing her. If they're in the background, they're also facing her, or they're doing something, but whenever there's a moment, they can always have one eye on her. They're never like at their backs ignoring her. If they're doing that, it's because the other characters are watching her. And we sort of tried to stage it that way to make sure she was always like in the focus of the shot and always which also at that point in the story, you become quite aware that she's kind of under a certain amount of pressure herself. And then it's like she's always being watched herself, right? Like it's sort of like the tables turn. It's not just a crowd of supporters. She's kind of a bit unnerved about, her situation. And then so it changes the balance of that to being in a crowd. Then it's kind of a terrible thing to experience for her. And we just try to make that, keep it so that she's always surrounded by people and always in a way which they all can have an eye on her.
So another thing you mentioned was the mirrors, the glass. There's tons of natural light in this set. There's lots of windows. Does that complicate your job as a cinematographer, given how many reflective surfaces there are in your scene?
Yeah, I mean, mirrors and glass can. We had, sometimes there was a large piece of art at the end of the long hallway, which originally had a huge glass panel in front of it, just on studs. But it just became too difficult to always miss it because it'll always reflect the camera, and it's enormous. So it's in those circumstances we actually removed that one and left the art without its glass. There's ways to hide the camera. It just creates complications of seeing, the crew members, things like that. We have various techniques to do that. Often glasses, you can gimbal the windows, things like that, or we cover the camera in black. You break up the silhouette of the crew with a black thing behind the camera, so you don't see any like the boom pole or the top of the camera or someone else's outline in there. That's one aspect. It does make things more challenging, but it is also part of what makes the thing alive. Using reflections and seeing multiples of people is really wonderful. Like shooting across windows and seeing two versions of somebody, especially when they're in a situation where the character has two sides, it can be really interesting. It just reminds us of this. And seeing a mirror image of somebody is slightly unnerving, right? Seeing the opposite side is kind of like we're on Zoom right now, you and I, but like we say the mirror image or not, or is what an option because people look different when it's not what we're used to seeing, right?
Right.
So it's a way to use that sometimes for that as well. So it creates difficulties, but also creates great opportunities.
You have one, I don't remember if it was at the end of the first or the second episode, but you have one great interaction with a window where Barnaby, Kiki's pet falcon, comes back to her, rescued falcon comes back to her and flies in through the window directly into her. Tell me about filming that scene.
That was a challenging scene to film because, of course, we're not going to have a real bird hit a window. Right. And there's two things about it. One, it's a wonderfully suspenseful scene. I think the way Nikki conceived it as well, the way Molly wrote it was great because it starts with sound, and the sound of something thumping on the glass is also sound that we've all kind of heard in some way through our lives usually, and it usually is never a good sound. You're always worried about something bad happening. So that added tension. And then in the lead up to not seeing what is out there, it's dark at night, some flying, we can't quite see, and the way we see cracks first before we see what it is. As far as filming the scene, the tricky part was we wanted to capture the horror of the bird breaking through kind of in one shot, and to see that and see her react and have Barnaby land. So we only know what it is just in the last few moments when we see the bird race towards camera and crash through the window. So for that shot, we had to choreograph it and decide where Barney would go before, and so Julianne could act to an imaginary bird because she's acting without broken glass flying at her and without a dead bird flying through the air. But we tried to map out exactly where it would go, and so she rehearsed. Then once she knew what she was seeing, and we could know where the bird was, we could lay the bird, our our now dead Barnaby on the ground at the end position, so she could act all that out, and then she could continue the scene and pick it up and continue the scene, which is just how we shot it. And then it's up to her incredible imagination during the take, because we also shot it in slow motion, so we could really see what was happening and make it kind of truly horrifying.
One thing that I want to kind of dive into for a little bit is how you're positioning within the frame the relationship between characters. So obviously, let's start with Kiki and Simone, Julianne Moore and Millie Alcock. They obviously have a very close sort of mother-daughter relationship. How are you positioning them within the lens? How are you filming them when they're, kind of working together?
It's interesting. There's moments where like it gets more intimate when we try and keep them more together. I think one of the interesting things in the show in general is the sort of siren point of view, where like you get inside between the characters when one is sort of being bewitched by the other, or being allowed to be sort of seduced. And there's a scene when a very unusual scene when in the beginning of episode 2 when Devon has just arrived and swum to the shore, and then Kiki shows up and kicks her out of Simone's bedroom. So I'll have to get some sleep, and crawls into bed with her. And it's very unnerving. And then when they're laying in bed, it's like the sort of like the two sisters together type thing. And it's very equal, because she's kind of looking for support. So we filmed them in very exactly, each shot's equal. Like there's the top 2 shots the same, and then the conventional coverage the same. And then we get into the sort of through the eyes point of view of the other. In that case, it's like that's the moment that they want. It's kind of it's sort of an intrusion of intimacy to be that close and to be also that equal. And yet everything else, it's like she just totally dismissive of her at times, right? Just like do this, do that. And she's giving her all the terrible tasks when she doesn't want to be mean to the staff. And so there's this wild and balanced constantly. So when we do make them equals, it's always something when she really wants something from her, or when she's trying to, win a way, which is more manipulative. Because in the other parts of the scene, sometimes she's her boss and she's making her do these terrible things and uncomfortable, not terrible things, but uncomfortable things, or when she's really treating her like a staff member that is like, doing all the dirty work for her and things she doesn't want to do. So try to maintain that shift throughout those things. So what about Kiki and Peter? How do you represent their relationship through cinematography? Well, the thing with Kiki and Peter's kind of mysterious at the beginning, because we don't really know much about him, and we don't really know, what his journey is like. We tend to treat them kind of like equals, but of course that's an illusion, as we find out. And so that was the idea, was to, like, he is the patriarch of this house, but also they are a couple, until we find out later that it's not really equal. And so I try to treat them like equals in all the scenes together with them. They're just like, they're equals in the shots, that we don't take one point of view over the other. Like with scenes with Millie, for example, with Simone, a lot of times we want to be with her because we want to be with her experience of what's happening. It's very internal, what she's experiencing and what's going on. With Simone and Peter, we always stayed to make sure we're equal between them, because we don't really know what the balance between them. So we never took one side or the other, visually or not. It was basically treat them equally. I also love the scene where Devon hears Kiki singing. She's in the bathtub. And she's drawn to that moment. And then all of a sudden, there's a very complex sort of setup within that scene, because, obviously Kiki's in the bathtub and Devon is embarrassed by that and all that. Talk to me about that scene. Well, it's so funny because I didn't shoot that scene myself, so I wasn't there, because that was an episode. That's right. Yeah. I only did 1, 2, and then 5. Okay. But yeah, it's a great scene. That was one of my favorite scenes in the script. So it's a great, again, intrusion of intimacy into something that's quite manipulative, which is like the sort of strategy with her, right? Yeah. Break down the walls of intimacy and then suddenly, be in there when you shouldn't be. What was that partnership like with the other cinematographer whose name has escaped me? It was wonderful. I mean, Zoe White's an amazing cinematographer, and she joined the show just originally I was going to do episodes 1, 2, and 4 and 5, and then there was a Twitch and directors due to scheduling later, so she stayed on to do episode 3 and 4, and she did a beautiful job. And she's an amazing collaborator. She's done a lot of amazing work, and it's always fun to have another cinematographer to collaborate with or to talk to about things, and also because we share the same crew. And I've had that experience on bigger shows before, like on Game of Thrones and on Watchmen, and it's a real wonderful asset to have another cinematographer especially to go through complex ideas, or things like handling things like the Perch set, for example, which is a very complicated set because it was actually built on top of the mansion set. Normally it would be built on a separate stage, its own little place, but because of lack of space, we had to build it on top of the other set. So we're dealing on top of the other equipment and stuff like that. And it's just great to be able to talk about those things with another cinematographer and to be able to, collaborate on ideas and to see how things develop and like build off each other's ideas. Like the sort of ideas of like how mystical we should make things, or how like the hint of mysticism is there, and the cult like element, and how to bring that out visually. And using, like Zoe used water reflections in her episode, which is something that we had talked about, in prep. Like, do we do that? Would you bring these themes back in, the nautical elements? There's things in the sound design, also in the dialogue about, hinting that maybe Michaela is really a siren. Maybe she's 1,000 years old. We don't know at that point. But that's part of the idea, to make us inquire about that. And getting into, dreamscapes, things like that. There's another dream sequence that was in episode 2, which didn't make it in the final cut. And we discussed how the dream sequences would be similar in some ways, or the points of view of them, or the idea of this sort of siren gaze. And yeah, it's really fun. She's amazing.
So of the 3 episodes that you shot, what was the most challenging moment to set up?
I think one of the most challenging ones and one of the most interesting ones was, I think it's what I mentioned before, where the 2 of them were in bed, because we did, when we do the sort of like personal point of view of being within the gaze of someone else, a bit like Hannibal Lecter and Clarice in Silence of the Lambs, that's usually a person playing to the camera, or they're looking at the lens, and for a short scene, that's fine. They have 1 or 2 lines. They've done the scene before, but that scene in the bed was longer, and I really wanted them to be able to act to each other. So I thought, well, we've got to figure out a way to make it so that we can do this. And the scene when they're in the 2 shot, they're acting with each other, and the normal coverage, I've got 2 cameras shooting over each other's shoulders at each other. But to do the gaze into the cameras is kind of impossible. That with 2 cameras, they'd be looking at 2 cameras of each other, and they wouldn't be seeing each other. So the technique we came up with was using a half silver mirror, like a beam splitter. And so what we do is they both look at the mirror. It's a bit like what Ken Burns does in his documentaries, where he uses a beam, like a teleprompter beam splitter. So the subject sees the reflection of Ken, right? The other, which is in this case the other actor, and the camera is looking through the beam splitter at the subject. So in this case, both actors are they're at 45 degrees to each other. So we've got the bed and we split them apart 90 degrees. So they're looking into a mirror, and behind the mirror are 2 cameras. So each of them are looking at each other in the mirror, but each camera is looking at them through the mirror. So they actually see each other. They can act, they can overlap dialogue and recording at the same time. And it was a way for them to have this longer scene and be this close and still feel like they're playing the scene in the bed. But that was a challenging thing to do, to break the set apart and build a whole new set with these 2 cameras and the mirrors and black everything out and maintain the lighting the same. And it was like crawling into a little fort of like a hanging sheet and stuff to make the lighting all work kind of close up. And it was very difficult to line it up, but it was great when we did it. It was such a beautiful point of view, and the acting is, and they're both so amazing in that scene. Yeah, and that was a challenging thing to do, and also so grateful that the cast were like game for this kind of crazy idea. Like, you're going to crawl into this little hole that's going to look like it's the bed, lie on your side, stare at a mirror, and look at the other actor who's just a foot away from you. And they were totally game for it at that point. And the scene was already really good. And it was very challenging to set up, but it was very rewarding.
Excellent. Last question for you. What was your favorite scene that you shot?
I'd say that's one of my favorite scenes. I think the other favorite scene, is the last, I would say, like the last 2 scenes of the episode of the show, which is on the ferry with Michaela and Devon, and then seeing Simone on the edge of the cliff at the end. Like, those 2 things combined. They're both shot at sunset on different days and making them together. And we managed to get the beautiful weather that we really needed for that moment to make that moment great. And we happened to have the incredible sunset especially on Millie's day. And her performance is incredible. That close up of her at the end, where she's kind of like both sad and, apprehensive and kind of happy and, feeling all these things are going through her face. And to get that with a real sunset and to have such a beautiful, perfect image of that was really exciting.
Yeah. All 3 actresses are fantastic in this. And,
but
it's amazing. It's such a revelation to me, because I'd only known Millie from House of the Dragon, of course. Yeah. And to see her, Americanized so flawlessly and just to step into this world in a totally different character and a totally different environment was just kind of a revelation.
Yeah, she's an incredible talent. Her ability to analyze scenes and discuss internal motivation stuff, where she's so aware of those things and so has such great intuitions. Like, that's really fun. It was an incredible cast. It was like watching a great tennis match between them all, right? When every scene just became this level of just, not one-upmanship, but this ping pong of just the way they could play off each other was just amazing to watch.
Well, Gregory Middleton, thank you so much for the time. Brilliant work. Love the show. Love the look and the feel. Love the mythical island ethos and vibe you have created. So, congratulations.
Thank you very much. It was an amazing experience. I'm grateful for being asked to be involved. It's a special project. Thanks for your interest.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay.